We come to our time for exhortation this morning. And if you've already read the title in the bulletin, you may have had some sort of thought to yourself, is Clint starting to dabble in the prosperity gospel? We're about to hear an exhortation on wealth and building wealth. Does this mean then that it is your time today to name and claim and overflow? And while that's not what is going on here, wealth building is a biblical value. It isn't the highest value, and there are some serious warnings about the desire to be rich and the love of money. But many wealthy men and women in Scripture are commended for their wisdom and faithfulness as stewards of God's blessing. And all I'm doing this morning is really continuing my series through the Ten Commandments, this being based upon the eighth commandment, which is, of course, Exodus 20:15, you shall not steal. You shall not steal. And the flip side of this prohibition against stealing in Scripture is always to work hard with your own hands. Ephesians 4:28 says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. The Westminster Larger Catechism goes on to list many positive duties of the eighth commandment. And so this morning, I'm briefly going to walk through 5 of those. There's many more, but for the sake of time, we'll hit 5 of them. First, the eighth commandment requires, quote, truth, faithfulness, and justice in contracts and commerce. Several of you are in a line of work that calls for you to price your own work. And the Lord requires you to do so fairly. Do not overcharge. Do not seek to squeeze every dollar you can out of your clients. Bid honestly. Reject the temptation to bait and switch. Because when you charge more than what is fair, according to the eighth commandment, you are essentially stealing. Do your work for a fair wage and trust God with his work of providence. Second, it says render to everyone his due. In other words, pay your debts and pay your employees. The Bible prefers a daily pay schedule. Now, that isn't prescriptive, and every other week pay schedule is fine, but this does tell us that God values prompt payment for labor. God does not want people working and then waiting weeks or months for the payment for their labor. Pay what you've promised, when you've promised. If you withhold what is due, you are stealing from your neighbor. Third, the eighth commandment requires generosity. Again, just not stealing is not enough. You are to be generous. Notice back in that Ephesians 4 passage, Ephesians 4:28, that the repentant thief is to work, quote, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Right? That's the reason. Generosity isn't going above and beyond. Generosity is the expectation for the Christian. Often we think, I pay what I owe, I give what is required of me, and generosity is above and beyond. But that is not the worldview of the Christian. Generosity is the expectation. A stingy person is no better than a thief in God's eyes. Fourth, it requires, quote, a lawful calling and diligence in it. Get a job and get one that pays enough to provide for yourself and your family, those for whom you're responsible. That allows you an opportunity to build wealth, to be a blessing to others. And once you've found that job, be diligent in it. Work hard. Do all things as unto the Lord. If you work for someone else, be their best employee. If you work for yourself, be disciplined and manage your time well so that you don't waste your time and steal from yourself and your children. The scripture says that if anyone does not provide for his family, he is worse than an unbeliever. This is an important requirement of the eighth commandment. See, we live in a time, and you all know this, we live in a time where wages haven't kept up with the cost of living. And it is much harder for young men to find good-paying jobs than it used to be. Young men, reject the temptation to whine and shake your fists at the boomers or whoever the man might be in the situation. Accept that this is the providence you've been given and be diligent. Be diligent. God still blesses hard, faithful work, and he despises complainers. So be diligent in finding a good, lawful job and be diligent in it. Fifth and finally, the Catechism says, by all just and lawful means to procure, preserve, and further the wealth and outward estate of others as well as our own. That's a lot of words. I'm going to read that again. The eighth commandment requires that by all just and lawful means to procure, preserve, and further the wealth and outward estate of others as well as our own. And this brings us back to the point where I began. You have a duty to build and protect your own wealth as well as the wealth of others. Some of you need to start by getting a grip on your own spending. Get on a budget. Some of you need more gainful employment. Some of you make plenty of money and you need to be generous. You need to do what is necessary to procure, preserve, and further the wealth and outward estate of yourself and others. And all of this matters, and I'm talking about this from the pulpit, because pursuing wealth can be a righteous thing, but only when it isn't the main thing, right? It can be a righteous thing, but only when it isn't the main thing. The main thing that drives your pursuit of wealth must always be love for God and love for neighbor. Later, we'll see that this drive for wealth can be and often is unrighteous when we look at the 10th commandment and the prohibition on covetousness. And we all need that warning too, but some of us need to recognize that apathy towards wealth in general is a form of theft. It is poor stewardship of the blessing of God. It is poor dominion in the world that he has given us to cultivate and subdue for his glory. And we must guard our hearts against this as well. So as we prepare